to finishing up Rule 11. I'm going to read it one more time, and goes like this. 3 things a worker with the law must now accomplish. First, ascertain the formula which will confine the lives within the ensphering wall. Next, pronounce the words which will tell them what to do and where to carry that which has been made. And finally, utter forth that mystic phrase which will save him from their work. Now, the average guy who reads this, it would be like gobbledygook to him. And this was Rick's biggest complaint of DK's writings is they are quite difficult to understand until you really focus on them. But it's actually not as complicated as it sounds. Let's go through this and just summarize it, the meaning. 3 things the worker of the law must now accomplish. This is as he's finishing his visualization, his planning, his scheming to manifest some idea that he's had, that he wants to create in the physical world. And he says, first ascertain the formula which will confine the lives within the ensphering wall. Okay, everything that's created is created by some type of life form. And so the little lives which are responsible for putting everything together have to be confined within an ensphering wall. In other words, you have to create a plan, and the plan has to confine the idea so it's not scattered. One of the biggest mistakes people make in creation or manifesting an idea is they scatter their energies. And actually, people that don't get a lot of ideas are often more successful than people who get a lot of ideas. If you get a lot of ideas, you often think, oh, I'd like to do this thing and this thing and this thing. And there's so many things you want to do, and you wind up not doing any of them because you're not focusing on one idea enough. Where the Forrest Gump type of guy only gets one idea, and he puts all his energy into it, and even though he's not that bright, he can still manifest it because he's focused. Okay, so the creator must confine the lives within the ensphering wall. He must focus his idea and within ring past knot so that enough energy can be accumulated to manifest it. The second thing he says, pronounce the words which will tell them what to do and where to carry that which has been made. Okay, you need to pronounce the words, or in other words, create a formula, create a plan. Good idea to write it down, or at least have it in your mind so you can explain it to others, so that the idea can be communicated to other intelligences, humans, as well as deva intelligences and elemental lives, in such a way that the ingredients of the idea will come together to manifest. And third, utter forth a mystic phrase which will save him from the work. And what that basically means is that once the idea is out there and begins to manifest, then the creator must not identify too strongly with the creation. The creator must realize that he and the creation are not the same. You are pure spirit. You being the creator are a pure spirit. The creation is something that's manifesting in the material world. And not connect yourself too strongly. So uttering the mystic phase is really a process the creator goes through so he's detached from his creation. So he's not, so its success or failure doesn't affect him too much. He can still be objective and then move on to another creation. So that's basically the essence of Rule 11. Now we'll go. After that, we'll go ahead and finish it off. Any comments on that before we move on to finishing off this rule?
Yeah, it's just saying the word to make it move on its own energy. Brings to my mind Star Trek when the captain says, "Make it so."
Right. Yeah, and creation is a little like what I call the satellite principle. To put a satellite in orbit, it has to go reach a velocity of 18,000 miles an hour, and to reach that velocity takes a tremendous amount of energy. But when the satellite reaches that velocity, the rocket drops back into the atmosphere, the satellite goes into orbit, and it just stays there. It doesn't require any more energy, and this is the way a creation is. It takes a lot of energy to get anything started. Anyone here ever, how many here has been in a business before? Curtis, you've been in a number of businesses. Did it take a lot of work to get it going?
Boy, I guess. Well, I have a pest control business. At first, I had to advertise like crazy, and I had to knock on doors and do everything to drum up work and get referrals. Now, I've knocked on maybe one door.
So now you're in orbit, huh?
Yeah, I'm in orbit. I'm just free floating. The calls keep coming in. The money keeps coming in. New ideas keep coming in. Yeah, I can sit back and relax, and all I have to do is the work now.
Yeah.
Just pray a little bit, and that's not even that hard.
Yeah. Pray that it continues.
I've got
Okay,
a
we're
question. I got a question. This formula sounds like the formula that the monad used to create us and our personalities, our physical, emotional, and lower minds.
well, yeah, it's all creation has really the same principles behind it. So whether it be monad or the soul or you, the principles of creation are very similar.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That here we are. We have an ensphering wall, our skin. Words have been pronounced to let us go forth. Um, however, on wings of power, we are the personality is like a creation of the or a projection of the spiritual side down, and it uses the same formula to create what we see as ourselves, as we use to create outside of ourselves.
You know, that's a good point because the soul has created us and just let us go. It doesn't come and micromanages. You know, you can go ahead and make the biggest mistake that you can think of, and your soul's just going to let you do it. Because it's pronounced the words to let you go. And then when you become useful enough, it'll kind of make use of you some more. So, so that's an interesting correlation. Yeah. Now he says we were talking about the managing death and the physical body, and he says the physical body has an etheric double, which has 3 orifices of exit for the life force. One, he says, is in the solar plexus, second in the head, and the third one is in the heart. Now, the advanced beings exit out of the head when they die. Average people exit out of the solar plexus, and kind of the in-between people that are kind of good-natured exit out of the heart. And he says here he talks about the opening in the head. And when a baby is born, it has that soft spot at the top of its head, and after a few months, that just closes up. But he says this spot there at the top of the head, he calls a fontanelle, is when that opens up, a person has psychic abilities develop. When there's 2 types of psychic abilities. It says when the solar plexus entrance is ruptured, the person acquires lower psychic powers. But when the this top of the head area is opens up somewhat. He acquires these higher psychic powers, as well as the ability to pass into the state called samadhi, which is the spiritual correspondence to the trance condition of the medium. So the higher correspond, you have a mediumship centered in the solar plexus through the regular trance medium, and that's where they and it's caused by a rupture. And now you have on the top of the head, you have that opening up of that place for the that soft spot in the head from when you were a kid. When that opens up, I don't know. I think he's talking about in the etheric body rather than the physical, because I don't know of anyone that's actually has the bones open up there, but it's probably in the etheric body he's talking about here. When that opens up, then the person is able to go into the higher correspondence of the trance state. And this, he has a lot higher consciousness. He says, just as a disciple must link the soul and the body, so must people of the planet as a whole link up the psychic, etheric, the astral, so it is like one plane. When this happens, the fear of death will disappear, and many will have continuity of consciousness. So this is a goal for humankind, to link up the psychic, the etheric, and the astral, or the physical, also as if it's just one plane. And also, this would eventually also include the mind. So in other words, we are heading into this new age where people will see beyond the physical. They'll be able to see the etheric. And a lot of people right now, if they look at a flower, can see the etheric double, just that reaches just a little bit beyond the leaves of the flower, or the petals of the flower. And then also they if you look harder, you can see some light emanating from any physical object. The more alive it is, the more light that emanates from it. But even a rock has some light and etheric double to it. But at our gathering, we had Jonah stand against a wall, and everybody looked at him, and then he moved away, and everybody saw his physical etheric body there. What'd you think when you looked at your son there, Adam? Did you see his etheric double there?
Yeah, it was a little thicker than I had expected too.
What do you mean by thicker? Broader, you mean?
Broader, yeah. Just I expected maybe a centimeter, and it seemed like it was a little wider than that.
Okay, that means he's quite healthy. The healthier you are, the more your etheric body extends from your skin. Okay, a person that's not very healthy, is the extension of his etheric body will be very thin. The person that's very vital will have his etheric body will extend a little farther out than average. So probably means he's in pretty good shape there. And maybe it's from playing all that soccer that he does, huh? Okay. Then there's higher unifications, he says, beyond unifying with the etheric, the astral, and the mind. We got the Buddhic level, and atmic and so on, but he says we're not prepared for the higher unification, so not much sense in talking about it. But just to, if we can reach a point where science realizes that we have an etheric field all around us, they know there's fields around us, like magnetic fields and so on, but they explain them all in a physical terms rather than looking on these energies from a spiritual level. And this is what we need to do. We need to be able to see that there's spiritual creations at a higher level than the physical. And this is coming more and more people are accepting things like this, because a lot of it is these near-death experiences are convincing a lot of people, even some atheists, that there's something beyond the grave and there's something more than just physical that we can see. He says, he gives 4 rules so the seeker can be prepared for unification as well as death when it comes. He says, 1, learn to keep focused in the head through visualization and meditation through the steady practice of concentration. Develop the capacity to live increasingly as the king seated on the throne between the eyebrows. In the ancient wisdom, they say the true throne of God is that which is seated right between the eyebrows. The eyebrows is where the throne of God is, and the person seated there is really you. So you have an opportunity to take that seat there. And when you take that seat there, you can then visualize all the powers of the Godhead being associated with you. You are in the image of God, and so you have all the potential of God within yourself, including the throne of God that's in what's called the Ajna center, or the third eye, or the center between the eyebrows, so to speak.
Well, it's like
Second, yeah.
when Jesus said, I have overcome all things, and he who overcomes all things will sit down with his Father in his throne, even as I have overcome all things and am sat down with my Father in his throne. That's referring to the Father in heaven, or your monad, your spiritual side, which is what you're talking about. It's not some obscure throne, behind Kolob somewhere. It's
Right.
actually
Right. So yeah, it's amazing how many of the scriptures can be interpreted internally within our own being. And it's important also to realize that no one interpretation of any inspired work is all there is to it. There's always several levels of interpretation, so that's important to realize. One level is interpreting them as having correspondences within ourselves. That may be the most important level for us to focus on at this time in our evolution.
Wasn't that the purpose of your writings when you rewrote the Book of Revelations? Was to
I reinterpreted the Book of Revelation to give it a totally different slant, because everyone's expecting it to happen on a physical level exactly as predicted, like some big comet's going to hit the earth and destroy 1/3 of all life in the waters, and so they expect that exact thing to happen. And very few things are going to happen exactly. Now, there will be some physical correspondence happen that will be close enough to make believers think, we're right on the edge of the whole thing happening. Like when Chernobyl, they had the big accident at Chernobyl, I think, somebody said Chernobyl meant the same as wormwood. And so they thought, wow, this is like wormwood in the Book of Revelation that's going to destroy 1/3 of the world, But 1/3 of the world didn't get destroyed. It didn't happen the way a lot of people thought it was going to, but it was interesting that there was some interesting correspondence there, but it didn't work out literally the way a lot of believers thought. Second, he says, ask yourself if your service is motivated to enhance the ego and self-importance, or for the good of the whole. So these are things for us to prepare for unification on this life as well as death when we meet the end of our life. This will be the question that will meet us at death. Was our whole life just about our ego and our self-importance, or were we in it for the good of the whole? Third, learn as you go to sleep to withdraw the consciousness to the head. This should be practiced as a definite exercise when one falls to sleep. One should not permit himself just to drift off to sleep, but endeavor to preserve the consciousness intact until there is consciousness passing out into the astral plane. This may take years to achieve. Yeah, this is very difficult because when you're going to sleep, it's very easy just to drift off. But he says, keep your focus in the head. And even if you don't achieve the memory of returning to your soul and everything that happens there, by keeping your focus in your head as you're drifting off to sleep, you will retrieve more impressions from your sleep with your soul. So when you wake up, you will get impressions throughout the day as to things that will help you achieve additional light or direction in your life. So you get this from keeping the focus in your head as you go to sleep. Now, during our meditation we just did, we saw ourselves rising above the head up into the crown center. That's a good thing to do too. There's two centers to focus on. One, the throne of God, so to speak, or the center between the eyebrows, and see a light there and see yourself merging with that light. And also to raise yourself above, just about 6 inches above your head, and feel as if your body does not exist. You know what the biggest problem for me in doing this is?
Staying awake.
It's when I have an itch somewhere. I'll be focusing and as if my body doesn't exist, and all of a sudden my back may start to itch in the hardest to reach spot, you know, as I'm laying on the bed. So that's the I think an itch is harder to ignore than a pain. Pain I can ignore pretty easy, but if your nose itches or something like that, I've always felt sorry for these paraplegic people that can't scratch their nose, you know, or their forehead or whatever. And so it must be, I would think that's worse, almost as bad as the being paraplegic itself. But anyway, if you can get over that, ignore everything that's going on in your body that's a distraction, including an itch or any pain or any discomfort, and act as if your body doesn't even exist. Raise your consciousness up and just see what happens. Just attempt to stay there as you're going to sleep, and you should have some interesting experiences.
What I found, Joe, doing
Yeah.
that is I was in bed meditating, and I put my attention right up here, my consciousness, and before I knew it, I was awake the next morning, and I thought,
Really?
that's weird. So the next night I did it, and as soon as I put my consciousness up here, I was almost immediately asleep. And I tried it every time I try that, I go right to sleep. And people who have a hard time falling asleep, if they just put their attention right up here, breathe a little bit, boom, it's the most relaxing, put you to sleep.
Yeah, in a way, it's a little frustrating after you read the Tibetan, because you think, I'd like to be conscious and be right in the kingdom of the soul, and then you get up there and boom, you go to sleep.
Exactly right.
It's really hard to keep your consciousness open as you're going up there. It takes a lot of I'm working on that myself.
I wish I could fall asleep that easy.
You can.
Yeah, try that out.
I don't think that's going to work for me. I think I tried that. But
It's going to work for you, Joshua. I see it working for you.
All right, you might be looking too far in the future. But
imagination is running wild in the delivery of your sleeping.
All right. Well, maybe I'll try it tonight, and we'll see if that's closer or further in the future.
I'll tell you what, I'll do it the same thing. We'll meet on the astral, in the astral plane.
Okay.
Have a chat.
The fourth thing he says to do is to record and watch all phenomena connected with the withdrawing process, whether followed in meditation work or in going to sleep. Some may experience phenomena such as a jolt, a snapping sound, or see clouds of color, or banners, or streamlets of violet. Anybody see anything like that? You sometimes feel a snapping if you leave your kind of get half asleep and then you jump back in your body. That'll create a snapping. But he says a person who has learned to handle his body as he falls asleep has an advantage while living and also during the death process over the man who never pays attention to the process. So he doesn't really go into a lot of detail how it produces an advantage at death, because most of us think at death pretty much if you're a halfway decent person, you go to the same place. But he says there's an advantage at death to the person that focuses on this light in the head as you're going to sleep. It'll make death a lot more natural. Matter of fact, the scripture says that death will be sweet to the righteous, so to speak. So maybe that's part of it, is if you practice dying, because sleep is really practice dying. He points out this sleep and dying is very similar. So if you learn to go to sleep in such a way that your attention is in the highest level, then perhaps that helps the person to bypass the lower astral after death and go straight to the higher levels where the soul is. That would be my guess on that. Okay, any comments on that, questions on that before we move on? Next, he talks about the technique of dying. He says, when the person approaches death, and this one thing we talked about last week is death needs to be approached more scientifically. He says birth is approached scientifically by the soul. In the world of the soul, there are intelligences that are great scientists that put together all the things that transpire in creation. And so he says one of the things that's a science on the other side is preparing the entity for birth and preparation for his life to come in the physical. So he does a lot of preparation for this, including visions where he sees all the possibilities that could happen in this life. And so he helps prepare for all these things. The mate that he will have, the friends that he will have, all these things he plans in advance as much as possible. They're not planned to perfection because of free will. We can always interfere with the plan once we get down here, because a lot of us are somewhat dense and we don't get all the communications from the soul. So sometimes we don't, we have to improvise to fulfill our life's goal. But he says death should be approached with as much science as our life was approached. And so he gives several hints on this. He says, for one thing, we should plan our death. If we realize our bodies are all worn out, then an advanced soul, he says, can actually decide when he's going to die. So could you imagine some guy thinking, well, you know, my body's pretty much worn out, so I'm gonna take off in another month, so I'm going to invite all my friends around and have a going away party. Okay, he says this will be common in the future when people become more enlightened. And then when the person gets ready to die, he says there should be silence in the room. The departing soul is usually much more aware than it seems. He says even if a person appears like he doesn't know what's going on, if he's unconscious, when he's ready to die, he's much more aware than it seems. He says in the room where the person is dying, or we should use orange lights when you're sure the person is departing. Orange aids the focusing in the head, just as red stimulates the solar plexus, and green has a definite effect upon the heart and life streams. So if you have your grandmother near passing away, get an orange light and turn it on and bring it'll help her focus in a positive way. He says certain types of music will be used when more in connection with sound is understood, but there is no music yet which will facilitate the work of the soul and abstracting itself from the body. Those certain notes on the organ will be found effective. So in the future, they're going to have certain types of music developed, he says, but we don't have anything designated now that he could pinpoint. Now, this was written in 1934, so it's possible some inspired people have come up with something. I don't know. I haven't heard of anything. But he says that certain notes on the organ will be found effective. I don't know. Organ does sound kind of like death music. But it does sound kind of doesn't sound like it has a lot of life in it. But to me, I've never been attracted to organ music a lot. But he says certain notes on the organ. He doesn't say what those notes are. He says at the exact moment of death, if a person's own note is sounded, it will coordinate the two streams of energy and eventually rupture the life thread. But knowledge of this is too dangerous to transmit yet and can only be given later. Okay, so a person's note can be sounded, which can cause him to die. So no wonder the masters don't give this out, because if you didn't like somebody and you knew how to sound the note correctly, you could cause the guy to die.
Be the perfect murder.
Yeah, that would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You don't need an organ either. It works on with the guitar.
Oh, yeah.
You can do it with a guitar.
Oh.
I have a note that'll put me to sleep with the guitar. If I just laid back with the guitar on my belly and play this one note, you know, I mean, if I could keep playing, it'd probably kill me.
Now, here's some information that Tibetan doesn't really give in detail, but he kind of hints at, is that each person has a chord. And the chord is composed of a note that's belonging to your physical body, one belonging to your astral body, one to your mental body, and one to your soul body. So you have 4 notes altogether that produce a chord, which is, when sounded correctly, can enhance your life energy, or it can be used positive or negative depending on your knowledge of it. So he points out the person's life note. Now, I'm not sure which note that would be. I don't know. He might be talking about a chord rather than a note. He says the person's own note sounded. Maybe he's talking about the note associated with the personality ray, but he's not really clear on that, but it's interesting to speculate on. He says pressure on certain nerve centers and on certain arteries will facilitate the work. So, well, this says acupuncture has the same principle. You have certain pressure on certain centers and acupressure that do have certain effects. So you can apply a pressure on certain nerve centers in the artery to make the passing more pleasant for the person. On the other hand, if probably the reason more knowledge isn't given out on this, imagine the guy thinking, well, it's time for him to go, so I'll apply pressure points here, and then the guy dies. He might be convicted of murder. So, so the metaphysician would have to be very careful not to be seen as a cause of his passing. It says mantric phrases will also be employed and definitely built into the consciousness of the dying person by those around him, or employed deliberately or mentally by himself. He says that Christ demonstrated the use of such a mantric phrase when he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. So he says that Christ actually demonstrated how to die. In other words, he just didn't wait for death to come. He decided his moment of death, and he uttered a mystical mantric phrase that released him. And he says we will learn to do the same thing that Christ did eventually. We will decide the time that we'll die. We'll gather around, maybe have a party and have a good time. And then when it comes time, we will say, create a mystic phrase which is tailored to ourselves. It may not be worded the way that Christ worded it, but it will be tailored to ourselves. And we will utter that phrase and then vacate the body and return to the kingdom of the soul. And so that would be interesting. Have you known anybody that's ever done that? Yeah, it's pretty rare right now. I don't know anyone that's done it, but maybe some people in India. Yeah, Ed?
Yogananda was at a dinner for the ambassador of India, and he sat there and had the meal, and then he bid everyone goodbye, and he slumped over dead. And you can read the story about Yogananda.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. So
I had a friend who was at that meeting, and he said that
really
exactly what happened. He just bid everyone goodbye, and he went on. He was finished.
Did he say any particular phrase? Maybe he just said it to himself.
I don't know of it.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe he whispered it to himself and departed if he applied this principle. And
I'll be back.
Good one, Curtis. He says a steady use of the sacred word chanted in an undertone or in a particular key to which the dying man will be found to respond may later constitute also a part of the ritual of transition, accompanied by anointing with oil, as preserved in the Catholic Church, as well as the Mormon Church. Extreme unction has an occult or scientific basis. At the top of the head, the dying man should also symbolically point towards the east, and the feet and the hands should be crossed. Sandalwood only should be burned in the room, and no incense of any other kind permitted, for sandalwood is the incense of the first destroyer ray, and the soul is in the process of destroying its habitation. So I guess we don't want to burn sandalwood as we're going to sleep if we want to wake up. Because he says this should be used by the dying person, and it produces a destroying energy. So in the future then, one of the things that the dying person will do is burn sandalwood, have his head anointed with oil, and have the sacred word spoken in a note that feels right to him. And you notice this when you say the Om to yourself, that there's a certain note that you will sound it on that sounds better than other notes for yourself. And when you find the note that sounds right for you, that's a good one to say it on. Now, if you're in group formation, there's a note for the group. If you're on just doing it as an individual, it may be a little different than the group you're associated with. But as you're doing it alone, there will be certain notes that vibrate more positively with you than other notes. He says, the incense of the first or the destroyer ray. He says this is all at this time that he can communicate on the subject of death for consideration of the general public. So he doesn't want to give out too much stuff, but you wonder on some of this, like, would it ever be safe to give out to the general public notes that could actually be spoken and actually cause someone to die? I don't know. I think we're a long way from making that safe. We're not safe having the knowledge of the atomic bomb in all the nations of the earth, that's for sure. So there's probably a lot of knowledge held by the masters that is not safe to give out to John Q. public. Matter of fact, they talk about certain secrets that are given out to different disciples. And he points out that Sanat Kamara is aware of anyone that violates these secrets, that if they were to violate the trust of the hierarchy and give out something that's very dangerous, he says his life will just be taken. He'll just drop dead. So that's how the masters guard the most important secrets, because there's always, if you have hundreds of people out there that know a handful of very important but dangerous secrets, you're going to have one every once in a while that decides to be a renegade, and he has to be stopped.
JJ,
according to DK, yeah.
Is that what spontaneous combustion's all about?
I don't know. Well, the people that spontaneously combust don't always seem that enlightened. So I don't know. It may happen once in a while that way, though. But yeah, that's kind of a mystery as to how that happens. It's really scientists probably wouldn't believe it's possible, except they've seen it happen, so they know it does happen, so they can't really deny that.
JJ,
yeah,
I remember the part you're talking about. Just to add some specifics to it, he was talking about secrets given out at initiation, that if those were betrayed, they would be struck dead or dumb or deaf or something like that.
Yeah.
So they might not be killed, but yeah, like you were saying.
Yeah, they'll be stopped one way or another. So in other words, since Sanat Kamara is aware of these guys, he can see it in his vision, and he has power to stop initiates from revealing secrets that they don't want out or too dangerous to give out. Matter of fact, the atomic bomb was. It's amazing that the hierarchy let that secret out, but both sides, both the left and the right, the dark and the light, were after that. So there are secrets that are potentially even more dangerous to let out than the atomic bomb, and so they have to be very careful about who these are revealed to, and then they have to be monitored to some degree, because like I say, there's always a renegade out there somewhere, you know. Okay, that's finishes up rule 11. Finally, we're getting through this. We got rules 12, 13, and 14 left. And or is there 15? Yeah, there's 15 rules. And so I'll just read the next rule for you to contemplate for next week. The web pulsates. It contracts and expands. Let the magician seize the midway point and release those prisoners of the planet whose note is right and justly tuned to what must be made. He points out that these, the last 4 rules are the most difficult to understand because the rules before this applied before the creation is actually manifest. But as the creation is actually manifest on the physical plane, then we have the point to where you have to do everything right. Once you get things into the physical, then you're not just focusing on theory, but you're focusing on what is called the real world, even though it's not the real world from a metaphysical point of view. We talk about this as the real world in the fact that this is where we see the end results transpiring. And he talks about this web contracting and expanding. And this talks about the opportunities for moving forward with your physical creation and making it effective. You have periods where you have opportunity and for effectiveness, and then periods where you should rest. And this is the important part of this rule is the understanding of cycles. We have cycles where it's really productive to put all your energy in something, and then other cycles where you need to rest and reflect. And we'll talk about that somewhat next week. Okay, any comments or questions before we wrap this up?
Yeah, and the labors of Hercules, after every labor, he rests.
Yeah. Yeah, a period of rest and reflection is extremely important.
Sundays are a day of rest.
Yeah.
I don't get much rest. Idea.
Oh, Curtis, let me put you back online. Say something so your face comes up again, Curtis.
My face coming up again?
Yeah. Now look at the top of Curtis's head. He's got all those lanterns. He collects lanterns. Look at all those lanterns.
They're lamps. They're lamps that have oil in them. And I collected them for a year, and then I got like 30 of them. I quit collecting them. I found that if you focus on collecting something, you do. I collected milk cans for a while, and then I got 50 of them, and now there's no milk cans anywhere. I got them all. But now I'm collecting money. Anybody has any money? I collected money.
Why were you collecting those things, and why specifically the lamps?
Some were rare and pretty and more valuable, and I just something to do that I like collecting, and I have some real pretty ones. Some are quite old.
Speaking of collecting, let me show you a picture of what the group gave me at the gathering. See if you can see it up here. Up at the top of my bookcase there, it says The Gathering Place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We signed that.
Yeah, so that was really nice of you guys to give that to me.
That's because Rick wasn't there to make one out of nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, Rick would have carved one probably if he'd have been there.
Probably. In Second Life, my group gathers at a place called the Gathering Oak. It's a tree, and it's a nightclub.
Okay, everybody. Any other comments or questions before we wrap it up here?
Well, I do have on this Rule 12. I've been waiting for this because in music, if you have a chime, like a tube bell type chime, if you have a single tube, there is a place that you can hold that tube with your fingers and then strike the tube and it'll ring. But if you move that place up or down at all, when you hit the tube, it just clunk, clunk. And it's because the vibration that the tube is vibrating in, it goes to both ends and it's reflected back and it creates standing waves. So if you look at it, it's like figure eights crisscrossing, and the place where they cross in the middle, that's the safe place where you can hold the tube. And it's the same, no matter what size tube, it's the same proportion of the distance down from the top.
Oh. Hey, that's interesting. We used to get those reeds, you know, down by the tulies, those little green reeds, and they're about that long, and you cut the one end off, and you have to hold it at a certain point in the reed, and then smash one end, and you can make it hum, make a sound out of it, like a musical instrument. Same thing, huh? Did you do that, Joe?
Not sure.
Probably did. Can't remember. With those green reeds about that long. Sound like a kazoo.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, the thing that I've been wanting to get to Rule 12 forever. This place where you can hold, where you're between vibrations, you're in the still place on the vibration. That can be expressed mathematically at down to 100 or 200 places after the decimal point. It can be, and it's going to be the same for every form ever created. If you hold it that proportion, it could be like 0.01 something down from the top.
Interesting.
So the entire chapter 12 could have been reduced to one number.
What fun would that
well, figure out that number and tell it to us next week.
I'll see if I can dig it out of my notes.
Okay, you guys, good class and good group
I just
today.
had a question. What do you think we'll do after we finish White Magic?
I don't know. I was thinking of maybe going over the molecular relationship book.
Oh, that'd be good.
That's a possibility, and most any Tibetan book would be good too. But
how about raising initiations? That's a good one.
Yeah. How about cosmic fire?
Yeah, I notice. This other group going over for the second time there, so that's been covered quite a bit by other people, but we'd probably cover it different than anybody else has done it, I'm sure.
It would take 5 years to do it.
Yeah, it would take a long time.
I thought the idea of being in a molecular group was to learn about making molecules. So, I mean, anything.
Yeah, I think probably going over the molecular book, I may even rewrite it if we cover it, rewrite part of it. There's I've had a couple more insights since I wrote that many years ago.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that if we do it. I think that'll be real helpful.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't really understand it completely, the principles behind it. A lot of people just think we're just creating another group, you know, and it extends a lot more than that. Okay, everybody. Really appreciate you being there, and we have a good group and good spirit here today. So we will see you next Sunday at 10 o'clock. And look who's showing up. My little wifey is here. She wants to say hi.
Hey, Artie.
She doesn't have her makeup on, so she doesn't want to show her face.
Oh, come on.
I don't have my makeup on either, but you guys have to put up with me.
I learned a new trick this week, how to make a master smile.
What's that?
Well,
is this a joke?
No, this is
It sounds like the beginning of a joke.
Well, it started when my students started asking me about how he could handle this situation. And so it's like a teacher, student, master, Padawan, whatever you want to say. If the master says, well, I look at you, you're full of light, you have the answer within you. And then the student replies and uses words and principles that were learned from the teacher. Then the master or the teacher will say, well, first he will smile and he go, make it so.
Yeah. Well, it's always fulfilling to see somebody follow your advice, no matter who you are. And it doesn't happen really that often in life, but when it does happen, the person given the advice or counsel will generally smile. Okay, lots of smiles as we bid adieu. We'll see you next week.